We're making great progress. In our last video, we set up the edit text fields for both email, password, and we added a login button. Now, let's go back into Android Studio and set these up so we can actually see what a user types in and then do something based on that when the button is clicked. Now, when you run the app, usually you get this. This is very helpful if you have errors or whatnot. Right now, I'm gonna click over here on the right just to get a little more room. If I wanna be able to talk to these text fields and see what's been typed into them, I need to be able to access them through Java. What I'm gonna do now is give them an ID. So let's click on email password and go to ID. Now, it's good convention and good practice to type some prefix so we know what type this is. This is of type edit text. So I'm just gonna write a lowercase et followed by a description that tells me what this is. That's not too long. So how about et email? Let's do the same thing for password. This is gonna be et password. Awesome. Let's go into our Java file for this activity, login activity. So the idea here is a user will type in the email address, the password, and then click login. When login is clicked, we're gonna check to see if this email address and password match the password and email we have stored. If so, we're gonna go on to the next screen. If not, we're gonna tell the user that their password and email are incorrect. We need to add an on-click listener to this login button. So if we go down, make sure we've selected the button, and we go to on-click, we can add an on-click listener name. Since this is login, let's call this on login. Again, notice, lowercase first word, uppercase second word. All right, I'm gonna hit tab, and that's going to lock that in. Let's make sure it did. And text, we look at our button, yes. Android on click on login. Now let's go to the Java file for that. Here's the shortcut. Over here in the middle, we're gonna set up another method for when the button is clicked. Public void on login, view v. It's always gonna be that until it's something different, but that won't be for a while. Add our curly braces. Great. Now this is red, so what do? We click on this, hit Alt, hold Alt, and press return or enter. And it imports that for us. So in order to talk to the text field to see what's in it, we need to set up a line of communication. One very helpful technique is to use what's called comments. Comments are things that you can write within your code file, but that are not actually code that the computer will try to read. Here's an example right here. Inflate the menu. This adds item to the action bar if it is present. Notice how it's in italic, and notice how it's preceded by these two forward slashes. If you do a forward slash like that, anything after that becomes a comment. The computer won't try and interpret that as code. That's usually just for information for you to use. So what's the first thing we want to do when the button is clicked? Well, first we need to check to see what is in the email and password fields. In order to do that, I need to set up a line of communication between the Java file and the email and text fields. Remember when we gave them an ID? It's gonna come in handy right now. In order to find that text field by its ID, I can use a method called findViewById. There it is. And the ID is going to be the ID that we typed in. Remember, it was et email. Now that's not quite enough for the findViewId method here to find the email. I need to add where it is. Well, it's in a folder called R. That's where all your IDs will be saved. And I'm going to say dot, also look in the ID section of that folder, because this was an ID, dot. Okay. Now, this is going to go out and find this ID. So I will set it to a variable. To set something to a variable, you create the variable and then set it equal here using the equal sign. So the variable I want to set is, I'm going to call it ET email, just so it's consistent with our ID ET email. Now, when you set up a variable, you need to know its type. So this type is going to be edit text. Okay. Now it's going to ask us to import that. So remember, it's highlighted red. Alternate, enter. We'll get rid of that. Okay. This little squiggly line is telling us that we forgot to do our semicolon at the end. Okay, now why is this all red? Let's see. If I click on this and I hit Alt Return, it's going to give us an option to cast to android.widget.editText. I'm going to choose that. Oh, and that fixed our problem. It added this edit text. Let's talk a little bit about variables before we move on to make sure we understand fully what's going on here. A good way to think about variables is to think of them as boxes or containers that you can put stuff in. Okay, let's take a look at the example we just typed in our Java text. Remember, we had an edit text. We stored it in a variable that we named etEmail. In order to link it to the ID, we used a method, findViewById. And in order to find that ID, we had to tell it what the ID was. In this case, the ID was email. And we also had to say, go into the R folder, go into the ID section, and look for this email. Then we added our semicolon to the end. Now we weren't quite done. Notice how this is of type edit text. But over here it says find view. Now, an edit text is a type of view. A button is also a type of view. In fact, everything in the widgets section is a type of view. Just like a cat is a type of animal and a dog is a type of animal, but a cat is not a dog. So what we had to do was what was called cast this side into edit text. Now they match, and now the computer will be happy. It'll say, oh, we are making a variable of type edit text and assigning it to something that is also edit text. Let's go back to the Java file and add some more code. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for our password edit text. So type edit text. Oh, what did I do wrong? There was a space. Okay. Let's name it the same thing that we named our ID, just to keep it simple. Do you remember what that was? It was ET for edit text password. Now let's use our method findViewById. Tell it to look in the R folder, ID section of that R folder, and look for ET password. And look, it's right there. Don't forget to put the semicolon at the end. Now, we could have added this edit text ourselves in order to cast it as an edit text so the types matched. But if we, when in doubt, if we click here and we hit Option or Alt Enter, it's going to suggest, do you want to cast this? Sure, go ahead and cast that for us. Now we could have written that in, but if you ever get that red squiggly line and you're not sure, go ahead and do the Alt Enter and it might have a good suggestion. So what we've done here is we've set up a line of communication where we can now communicate with those specific edit texts. The next thing we're going to do, so I'm going to write here in my comments, I'm going to say, set up a line of communication to the text fields. Okay. Next, I actually need to check what was entered into the text fields. Okay, notice if I put the little forward slashes, it's a comment, and so it's not actually going to be part of the code. So now, instead of having to refer to this by the method and the ID, I can just refer to this by the variable that we set up. Pretty convenient, huh? So we will say et email dot get text. So what this method is, anytime you see these little parentheses after, that means it's a method. So what this means is it's going to go ahead and get the text from our ET email. Okay, well, we need somewhere to put that. So it's going to go and get the text, but we need to put that in another variable. So let's make one more variable called email. This will store what it gets in our variable called email. But remember our syntax. We have to put the type first. So do you remember what type a string of characters might be? Well, it's called a string. You can think of words or letters together being of type string. So if I add string here, there we go. Now, it's not quite happy though. Remember here how we had to cast this into the edit text to make them match? Here, we need to convert the text we get into type string. So here, if we add dot to string, this method is going to convert what we get back and make sure it's a string. Let's look at this a little more closely. Okay, so when somebody enters their email in, it's of type string. Now, we want to store this in a variable. We'll need to add the type so that it knows which one it is. All right, we're going to do the exact same thing for our password field. Make a variable that's of type string. It's going to store the password that somebody actually types in. So what we're going to do is we're going to say go to et password, get the text, and convert it to a string. And we put our semicolon afterwards. At this point, we actually have the information that somebody typed into the fields. The next part is to check to see if that matches our stored email and password. So I'm going to write another comment here. Check to see if user entered email and password matches our stored email and password. Okay, so for this, we're going to set up an if statement, meaning if this, then do that. Let's take a brief look at how an if statement is composed. An if statement is a type of conditional statement. If this, then that. Else, that other thing. Notice the syntax here. This is important. So this will be our conditional. So in the condition that this is met, we will do this. If this condition is not met, then we're going to do something else. Here are some examples of conditions. This means if x is 2 or is equals to 2. We use this funny syntax with 2 equal signs. This means not equal to. You recognize the greater than and the less than. So if those conditions are met, then the computer will run code that you choose. We also have something called and or. This means if x is greater than 2 and it's also less than 4, the code will run for your if statement. Otherwise, the code will not be run. That is what's called an AND statement, and we use these two AND symbols. This is what's called an OR statement. We use these two symbols. This means if x is greater than 2 or it's less than 4, this will run. For ours, we want to use an AND statement because we want to say if the password is correct and the email is correct, then we will run, not just one or the other. Okay, so now let's create our if statement to check the password. So if, I'm going to use our variable here we created, email, and a method called dot equals. So if it equals some password, so this is where you can write whatever password, I'm sorry, whatever email you want. And so the email I'm going to write is Kingsley's email, kingsley@bulldog.com. Now, for a string, it's really important that you have them within quotation marks. Okay, if you don't, then the computer's going to complain, wait a second, it says cannot resolve symbol Kingsley, meaning you're writing this in like this is something I should know or understand, like this is a variable or some method, but I don't know what Kingsley the Bulldog is. And so you say, no, this isn't anything you would know. This is just a string that I made up. And so it's like, okay, I'm okay with that. Okay, so remember, we don't want just the email to be right, okay, because tons of people know Kingsley's email, right? They're always blowing them up. We need to say and. So if the email equals kingsley@bulldog.com and password, right? We're going to use password right here, and password dot equals Kingsley's password, which the one he always has, 1 2 3 4. So if this and that are true, then we're going to do something in that case. And so for right now, so if it's true, we're going to log in. If it's false, else, we're going to do something else. And this is going to tell the user the email or password is incorrect. How are we going to tell the user that the email or password is incorrect? Well, one way I like is using a toast, which we learned in Unit 1. Let's go ahead and make a toast to tell the user that their password is incorrect or their email is incorrect. So we're going to make a toast of type toast. I'm going to call this bad credentials, right? That's just the name that I'm giving this variable. And of course, this is highlighted red. So let's click alternate, hold alternate, hit enter to import that class. So bad credentials, right? Your credentials are your, basically like your login stuff. So this is saying this is the bad credentials toast. So you had the wrong email, wrong password. So kind of like we set up a variable here, remember? Type edit text, named the variable email. This is type toast, naming it bad credentials. Equals toast dot make text. Now this is the one we want. Toast dot make text. Context, we're going to use a method to get our context. Char sequence is really character sequence. That's basically what we want our toast to say. And the duration, which is going to be some integer, right? Some number. It's going to be how long we want it to display. Okay, so we have some presets that are going to make this easier for us. So, and we're going to use the autocomplete to help us also. So toast dot make text, okay. And for the context, we're going to use a method that says get application context right here. Ooh, I didn't even have to remember that. I knew it was something like that. So now this is where we're going to put our message in, and it's going to be between quotations because it's going to be a string. So I'm going to say wrong email or password, comma, here's where we're going to set the duration. So if I hit toast dot, there we go. Here's some possible durations. So length long or length short. So we're going to go length short here. And at the end, don't forget to put your semicolon, right? At the end of your phrase, kind of like a period. So now, if I say, now I can refer to this toast as just bad credentials. So bad credentials, and it sees this. Yeah, I know this variable you made called bad credentials. Bad credentials dot show. The dot show is a method that will show the toast. Okay, let's run this and see if our toast works. Okay. So let's type in some gibberish here. Okay, wrong email or password. Now, I'd rather that was kind of right here in the middle of the screen. So there's a couple ways we can do that. Let's go back to Android Studio and tweak our toast just a little bit. All right, so down here, before we show the toast, I'm going to say bad credentials, that's the toast I'm talking about, dot set gravity. So we're going to set the gravity. So that wants the kind of gravity, and it wants an offset X and Y. Okay, so if I say set gravity, and we have some kind of preset options. So if I hit gravity dot top, center vertical, center, no gravity. So let's type center vertical. And for our offsets, so remember it wanted the gravity, that's what we put there. For our offset, let's put 0 and Y0. We'll just have it smack dab in the center. Okay, let's run this again. Log in. Write some gibberish here. Cool. I like where that is. Now we need to set up what the computer will do if the password and email are correct. So over here, let's log in. Well, what does that mean? So part of logging in would be go to the home activity. All right, well, we haven't introduced the home activity yet. So let's go ahead and make that. So if I go to main, right click on that, new activity, blank activity, I can write my home activity. Okay, so for now, let me get a little more room by clicking over here. Okay, the home activity is just our default blank screen with our hello world. And we'll just leave it like this for the moment and see if we can get our login screen to actually log in and go to this screen if our password and email are correct. Let's go back to our login activity, the JavaScript, and how do we transition to another activity? We're going to make an intent. So if this is correct, then I'm going to make an intent. Okay, so here again, we've done this before. We didn't really know what we were doing in the past, but you can see now that I'm making an intent variable called I, and it's of type intent. So here it's red, hold Alt, Enter, import class. Got it. So this intent I is equal to a new intent. And what do I intend to do? I intend to go from where we are now, which is login activity, dot this, to the home activity, dot class. Okay, and don't forget our semicolon. So that's the intent. Now we just need to start this intent. So if I hit start activity. What activity am I starting? I'm starting I. Then we should be good. Let's go ahead and try this out. So let's just check to see if our password's wrong. Okay, good. Let's type in the real password. Kingsley@bulldog.com. 1, 2, 3, 4. Uh-oh. Now something isn't right here, so let's go to see what the problem is. Okay, here's where the problem is. And Android Studio is kind of helping us to find what it is by highlighting this. So it says equals between objects of inconvertible types, integer and string. What it's saying is 1, 2, 3, 4 are integers, those are numbers. But what you typed in was a string. So in order to fix this, let me just put the quotations here. And now I'm saying this is 1, 2, 3, 4 as a string. Let's run this again and see if it works this time. Okay, so it works. We typed in our email and password, and it took us to what will be our home screen.